Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S IAS. Do not forget to subscribe to our Telegram channel for all the updates and materials.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from the perspective of civil services examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 25th of May 2022. The article which we are going to take up have been displayed on the screen, and let us now begin the discussion.
Now before we proceed further for today's session, there are two important announcements to be made. The first one is regarding the optional subject. Now as all of you understand the importance of optional subject, so does the RAU'S IAS. RAU'S IAS is conducting the orientation session for various optional paper for you to understand the importance of optional paper in civil service examination, its important segments, and how it can help you till the interview stage. For better scoring in this examination, you have to choose the right optional subject, which is based on your interest, aptitude, and correct guidance. In order to have a better understanding, do join the orientation session of RAU'S IAS with respect to the optional subject. If you have not selected the optional paper, you can come and attend the orientation session for different optional paper and get the insights into the syllabus, subject and its better details. If you have already selected any of the optional paper, then you can come to get the better insights for understanding the syllabus and the approach towards this examination in the optional papers such as history, political science and international relations, economics, public administration, psychology, sociology, geography, and anthropology. You are invited to come for orientation classes between 24 to 27 of May in new building of RAU'S IAS at Old Rajendra Nagar. Please do register online at www.rausias.com. RAU'S IAS is announcing the mock 4 of Pre-Parikshan 2022 just before the examination for providing you the right simulation to score better in this year's prelim examination conducted by UPSC. The starting date for the pre-parikshan would be 27th of May right from the 9 a.m. in the morning, and it will continue till 29th of May 2022 till 9 p.m. You can participate in this test anytime between these two dates. The results of the test will be announced on 30th of May 2022. You can sign in, you can sign up on ELEARN platform of RAU'S IAS to participate in this test.
Piyush Goyal bats for local supply chains at Davos meet. He praises Indian business exports worth $421.8 billion. So Indian industry should strengthen domestic supply chains by sourcing supplies locally, has been stated by Commerce Minister Mr. Piyush Goyal. And this is exactly in the line of Vocal for Local campaign, which the government of India, especially Prime Minister, has been focusing upon since last 2 years. Now, if you look at the syllabus of GS Paper 3, under Economy, effects of liberalization on Indian economy, changes in industrial policy and their effects on industrial growth is a part of your syllabus. And one of the important or one of the most highlighting fact of industrial policy of our country in last 2 years has been Atmanirbhar Bharat and Vocal for Local. The emphasis of the government of India to boost the local manufacturing of goods, to boost development of supply chain in our country, to boost demand for Indian goods, so that not only we are focusing on the supply side issues, but at the same time we are also focusing on the demand side of it. And so in this regard, let us understand first what is Vocal for Local campaign. What are the main strategies of Vocal for Local, and whether it is absolutely a good idea, or just like any other scheme or policy, it is also plagued by some of the inherent challenges. And then finally, we will look at the way forward. Let us now begin the discussion. Now in this regard, if you might recall, Prime Minister Narendra Modi last year gave a call for Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India movement in response to economic hardship created by COVID-19 pandemic. As a part of such movement, he coined the slogan Vocal for Local. So whenever we talk about Vocal for Local, we fail to understand what is this white term encompasses. Is it just for manufacturing? Of course it is for manufacturing. So one of the components of vocal for local is to provide boost to manufacturing that is local. Indigenization of the manufacturing in our country. This must be done both by domestic companies as well as by foreign companies in India. And this is same as Make in India, wherein we need to boost manufacturing sector in our country. But vocal for local is Make in India plus plus. It has two other components which were gravely missing in Make in India campaign. For example, it also intends to boost the supply chain in our country. The entire supply chain for the manufacturing of goods should be set up in India to give further thrust to manufacturing sector and make India self-reliant. One of the reasons because of which Make in India project has not been so successful is the lack of focus on supply chain management or development of supply chain in our country. And then finally, these two steps, that is boosting manufacturing in our country and creating supply chain, would not be sufficient if we are unable to create the demand for Indian goods. And that is why one of the most crucial steps for vocal for local is to create demand for Indian goods. The Indian consumers need to be vocal about buying Indian products. They must not only buy foreign made goods or Chinese product or American products, but they should feel pride in consuming Indian manufactured products. And so these are the three pillars for vocal for local. So having looked at the objectives, the three objectives of vocal for local, it is time for us to understand what are the strategies which are being followed or adopted by the government to achieve these targets. Now, when we talk about strategies being adopted by the government of India, the first strategy which comes to our mind is adoption of or propagation of nationalistic sentiments. The government is trying to play over the emotional element of the economics. And hence, in this regard, government is increasingly appealing to nationalistic sentiments of Indians to buy and promote Indian goods. And that is what we have seen in the outreach made by our ministers, leaders of the ruling party. Then, government has taken some radical steps as well. For example, withdrawing itself or withdrawing India from free trade agreements. Government decided to withdraw from RCEP. For example, government has decided to withdraw from RCEP to protect its domestic industry. Also, it called for review of all existing free trade agreements to make them more India friendly. Then in past 3 to 4 years, government has increasingly adopted or resorted to protectionist measures. For example, imposition of custom duties or its increment, safeguard duties. And one of the best example of this would be duties being levied on solar panel cells to safeguard local industries. And then finally, the government has also decided to ban on sale of imported goods. Recent government notification that all canteens of the Central Armed Police Forces will sell only indigenous products is a step in this direction. So you can see that not only government has certain objectives with respect to vocal for local, but government has come up with some strategies as well to support or to reach those objectives. Now, the obvious question which will arise in your mind is that whether these strategies are right in the current context. Of course, the commonsensical approach tells us that protection of domestic industries is going to be ultimately beneficial for Indians. But if you look at our past experience, if you look at what had happened in India before 1991, the protectionist measure ultimately ended up hurting India's cause rather than benefiting us. It led to license and quota raj. It led to increasing inefficiencies in India's public sector enterprises. It led us to economic stagnation. And so when we talk about protectionism, when we talk about boosting local manufacturing, it's not always such an easy job. There are both sides to it. It might end up helping the Indian manufacturing or Indian economy in general, or it might end up making us more vulnerable to global shocks, and let us understand how. And so as a serious UPSC aspirant, it is important for us to look at both benefits and challenges of such a step. Now, benefits are not difficult to think of. Of course, if you provide incentives to foreign companies to shift their production base to India, definitely it is going to give a big boost to Make in India and will help in a lot of employment creation in our country. That is not difficult to guess. Apart from that, we have a historical justification to be vocal for local, because if you look at all the global brands, all the brands which are being produced by multinational companies, at some point of time they were provided local protection. So the brands that are local today were initially local and grew because of the customer support provided by their domestic markets. Hence, buying and promoting Indian goods is going to enable them to become global brands and increase exports from India. Apart from that, if you look at it, if you're going to boost manufacturing in our country, it is definitely going to boost local supply chain, which will result in Make in India, and hence will lead to reduction in our import dependence, which is one of the biggest sources where our foreign exchange reserve goes. Apart from that, higher domestic manufacturing leads to production of a lot of different varieties of products, which then ultimately results in higher amount of choices which Indian consumer has. And ultimately, all of us know that incentivizing the domestic production, incentivizing local manufacturing results in virtuous economic cycle. Increase in domestic investment and FDI leads to increase in employment opportunities in our country, which then results in increase in per capita income, which then results in higher demand for goods. Now, in order to meet this higher demand, you will have increased investment or increase in foreign direct investment to meet that demand. And so this cycle continues forever, and this is a perpetual virtuous economic cycle. So we can clearly see, as far as benefits are concerned, there are multiple benefits of vocal for local, not just one. By boosting local manufacturing, by increasing the demand for Indian production, and hence to sustain these two, you will create supply chains. It is going to have multiple positive ramifications. But even the step like this is not without its own set of challenges. And it is important for us to have a look at these challenges as well. And so let us now look at some of the most prominent 4 challenges economists anticipate might result from vocal for local strategy. For example, the first concern which has been raised by economists is that India is still not ready to go vocal for local. And simple reason is that India still has not gone through the structural reform which is needed for such a step to be successful. Because if you remember, Make in India was launched way back in 2014, but it has not been quite successful in all the 24 or 25 odd sectors in which it was launched. It was only in few selected sectors like automobile that it was. So what are these structural reforms which are still lacking in our country? So land acquisition is something which we still have not been able to figure out. Then we have seen extreme delays in environmental clearances. Then labor reform is one such area where India has to do a lot. Although India has codified the 4 labor laws, but they are still not notified, and so we are still waiting to see the full impact of the simplification of these code labor laws. Then the kind of strategies which the government of India is adopting, we have seen. They can be broadly categorized into protectionism. Government strategies such as increase in customs duty, preference to domestic local companies in procurement processes. What they basically do is that they shield Indian companies from foreign competition, which then of course results into declined competitiveness because it fosters complacency in domestic manufacturing, leading to decline in the quality of the Indian goods. India has to realize that it was its integration with global economy in 1991 that led to rapid increase in its GDP size from $270 billion in 1991 to around $2.9 trillion in 2019. And hence we can clearly see that the steps which the government is taking is putting India back to 1991 era or pre-1991 era, and hence towards anti-globalization policies. Then a very important point which is often forgotten is that the choices which people make come from income and they do not come from emotions. If I only have 10 rupees and if I have to buy chocolate, I will buy whatever chocolate is available in 10 rupees irrespective of the fact whether it has come from China, US or India. In a country where 22% of the population is still living below poverty line, food, clothing and shelter is of utmost importance for them. And so, increase in choices of goods has no meaning for people living below the poverty line or just above the poverty line. And so, whichever country, whichever goods coming from whichever country, be it imported, exported, locally manufactured, whichever good will be cost effective will be the one which will win the battle, and not whether it is being manufactured in our country. That is not the distinguishing criteria which the customer or the consumer is going to choose. And then finally, we often forget the development of local supply chain requires skilled workforce as seen in China. And it is exactly because of this, India needs to focus more on Skill India mission or Skill India campaign rather than just focusing on vocal for local. And so when we talk about strategies to be adopted by the government, we can clearly see or highlight four important strategies. First is that the government should focus wholeheartedly on bringing about structural reforms. Unless and until these structural reforms like enabling easy land acquisitions, notifying the labor codes, or expediting the environmental clearances, until and unless these steps are being followed through, the vocal for local is going to fail just like Make in India program. Then, apart from this, we have to also focus on providing enhanced skill sets to our young workforce and reap demographic dividend. And that should be priority number 2. Priority number 3 should be to enable free and fair competition between foreign and domestic companies. We should not create a platform where the foreign firms, the firms which are investing from outside or doing business in our country, feel cheated, feel discriminated against. That should not be the case. And at the same time, domestic firms must be encouraged to invest more and more on research and development. So if these 4 steps are followed through in this priority only, then we can hope for the vocal for local tag or the slogan to come to fruition. Lessons from Russia for India appears on page number 7. Now this war between Russia and Ukraine has taught a lot of things for military spectators and military analysts. And one of the important things which emerges from this is indigenization of military technology or defense indigenization. So we are going to begin the analysis by first understanding the mapping of this particular topic with the UPSC syllabus. And as you can see, achievement of Indians in science and technology, indigenization of technology and developing new technology is a part of your syllabus in GS paper 3. And so in this regard, we are going to discuss 4 key things. Why there is a need for indigenization, what are the issues with indigenization, what are the steps that have been taken for indigenization, and the draft defense and export promotion policy which was released just last year. And so let us now begin the discussion by first understanding why is there a need to indigenize. And this goes for any technology, this goes for any sector, but specifically for the defense sector. Why indigenization of defense technology is absolutely important for maintaining India's integrity and sovereignty. Starting with India's second largest arm importer. If you take all the countries which import arms and ammunition from foreign countries, India stands second in the list. So, very valuable foreign exchange reserve has to be divested, has to be spent while acquiring these arms and ammunition. Apart from running down our foreign exchange reserve, it also impacts our trade deficit. So by possessing a sound defense sector indigenously, India can not only reduce its dependence on foreign imports, but also it gives us an opportunity to convert this trade deficit into surplus. So this is just economy, but it also has a strategic point of view. It also has a security implications. By not possessing domestic capability to produce arms and ammunition makes India perpetually dependent on other countries. Because once you start importing a lot of arms and ammunition from foreign countries, first, it does not give you an opportunity to develop your own domestic base, and second, you are perpetually dependent for their parts, for their servicing, for their maintenance on the source countries. And this subjects India to a lot of strategic constraints. So for example, if you have imported significant amount of fighter jets from France, it is mandatory for India now to maintain cordial relation with France. Because if tomorrow France says that we are not going to service our Rafale jets, then India cannot do anything because there is no other supplier of the parts of this very specific and specialized fighter jet.
Apart from that, having a domestic capability to develop such a high-tech machinery is going to employ a lot of people, not just in primary but secondary at tertiary level as well. And it will definitely lead to overall industrial growth. Because you need to understand the concept of propulsive industry, and defense sector is a propulsive industry. So it's just not like a very minor industry which is going to serve its own purpose. Once a defense project is established, a lot of other industries are needed to support or to cater to the defense industry, and hence it has a multiplier effect. So propulsive industries are those which lead to generation of subsidiary industries along or around their areas. So you can understand that having a sound domestic base of manufacturing in defense technology is not only important for economic purposes but also very crucial for India's strategic independence or autonomy. Because then Indian foreign policies would not be contingent upon the policies of major developed countries. So for example, right now, West is in fight or in war with Russia, not directly but indirectly. Now, India imports arms not just from Russia but also from US and France, which is stopping India from taking any sides in this particular conflict. For example, in last 3 to 4 years, India is having a very hard time in convincing USA that import of S-400 missile defense systems from Russia should not be put under sanction list of America. So these kinds of problems shall not arise if India has defense domestic production or sound domestic defense manufacturing capabilities. So before going forward, let us now first understand what are the pillars of defense capabilities. So you need to understand that there are 4 stakeholders to defense manufacturing ecosystem. The first one is the end user, which is the overall purpose of designing a defense equipment, which are armed forces. They are the people who are ultimately going to use these weapons. Then next comes designing, which is the conceptualization of the weapons, for which we have DRDO. Then after an equipment has been designed or conceptualized, that design once approved is handed over to the manufacturer or the makers, which are basically either public sector undertaking companies or the private sector undertakings. And then last but not the least, pillar of defense capability is academia, where all the frontline research goes on. If we talk about the 4 components, the last one, which is academia, is the weakest link in our country because the human resource capabilities in developed countries which deal with the cutting edge research is generally located in top institutions like Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, whereas in our country, the cutting edge research is right now going on in DRDO and ISRO and not in our universities and institutes. So what are the challenges which India's defense manufacturing capabilities are facing? The first and foremost is the massive delays in not just the designing and manufacturing but also in the acquisition processes. And the main reason behind that is the functioning of armed forces, which are the users, the designers, which is DRDO, and the makers, which are PSUs, work in silos. There is hardly any interaction or collaboration, so to say, in between or among these 4 pillars. And because of this, when a need is felt by an armed forces or component of armed forces about a new equipment or a weapon or a technology, it is usually 5 to 10 years of delay when that need is communicated to DRDO. Then DRDO comes up with a design which is then delayed by almost 5 to 7 years in communication to PSUs. And so you can see once a need is felt at the ground level in border areas, it is already 20-25 years time when the weapon is made by the public sector undertakings. When we talk about delay in the designing and in the making stage, we can clearly see that defense technology in India is public sector driven. And so all the issues which plague public sector undertakings in all the sectors in our country also plagues the defense sector as well. Now, because of the government policies, there is still no liberalization in defense manufacturing, because of which all the major players are public sector undertakings, which then clearly reflects in either the final product being substandard or extremely delayed, which then renders it useless for the army, because by that time the government of India has already gone ahead and acquired a foreign made equipment or a weapon serving the same purpose for which the research was undertaken.
Then comes the issue of lack of critical technology. And this is mainly because of lack of funds as well as lack of requisite skills in the human resource in our country. And that is mainly because of the neglected fourth pillar of our ecosystem, which is academia. Our premier institutes in technology, for example IITs and NITs, do not have a separate stream specializing in defense technology. Even the funding of the government when it comes to designing of new technology is minimal. Then there are other issues as well. For example, long gestation period. As all of us can easily understand that these technology require a lot of time to be actually effectual on ground. And as we have discussed, armed forces usually run out of patience because ultimately they are the one who are going to defend our borders and us. And so they push the government to acquire foreign made goods, which then finally scuttles the defense development program of that particular weapon in our country. And then finally, we have a lot of land acquisition issues, just like all other fields, which have led to delay in a lot of defense development projects in our country. But it's not like government has not taken any initiative or step in this regard. We have a Department of Defense Production in Ministry of Defense taking care of production and designing of new weapons, which manages and runs the ordnance factories, which manufacture a lot of arms, and especially the minor arms, but which are mainly on the basis of technology transfer, where an original patent holder of a foreign weapon leases out licenses to manufacture a particular arm to various companies across the world. So it's not like a development of new technology, but production based on already existing technology purchased on license from a foreign vendor. Then we have a lot of defense PSUs, for example, HAL, MDSL. Also recently, government has started issuing licenses to the private sector players for the production of minor arms. So this is mainly as far as the production is concerned. What about designing? And for that, we already have DRDO, which is the prime agency responsible for designing and development of state-of-the-art defense technology, and one of the few most significant and successful technologies developed by our DRDO are Prithvi Missile, Agni Missile and Tejas. Then this is not just it. Indian Armed Forces have their in-house design team and the wings, which parallelly run the program of designing of new weapons. Because ultimately they are the ones who are going to use it, and so they are the most well-placed agencies to understand their own needs and come up with some very rough draft or a very initial basic design which can then be communicated to DRDO for further development. Then in 2020, government notified defense procurement procedure, which came up with a lot of categories of defense equipments. For example, made in India, built in India, designed in India. And depending upon the percentage of indigenization, the government gives preference in the acquisition process. Then the government has also come up with a lot of schemes, for example, Make in India, Startup India, IDEX. Then recently, Government of India has also launched this scheme of defense corridors. For example, the latest one being, or the only two being, located in Tamil Nadu and another one located in Uttar Pradesh. So the draft Defense Procurement Policy 2020 is the latest document of the Government of India. It is important for us to have a look at that. It aims to achieve a turnover of rupees 1,75,000 crore or $25 billion, including export of around 35,000 crore in aerospace and defense goods and services by 2025. It intends to develop a dynamic, robust and competitive defense industry, including aerospace and naval shipbuilding industry, to cater to the needs of armed forces with quality products. It also intends to reduce dependence on imports and take forward Make in India initiatives through domestic design and development. At the same time, it aims to promote export of defense products and become a part of global defense value chains. And finally, it will aim to create an environment that encourages research and development, rewards innovation, creates Indian intellectual property ownerships, and promote a robust and self-reliant defense industry. So how does it wants or intends to achieve all of this, which we have discussed in the previous slide? So the draft policy clearly lists down 6 major areas of action. For example, procurement reforms, support to MSMEs and startups, optimizing resource allocation, investment promotion, innovation and R&D, and focusing on DPSUs and ordnance factory board. So let us now begin with procurement reforms. Now we understand that procurement is completely and totally in the hands of the government. And so the government has proposed to publish a negative list. Now what does this mean? So negative list is a list of equipment, and if a particular equipment finds its place in the negative list, it cannot be imported, but only domestically manufactured. And so what government has done is that it has laid out a plan of yearly increasing negative list. So for example, let's say that the government notifies the negative list for 2024 and helicopter is there in 2024, which will mean that 2024 onwards, helicopters cannot be imported in India. It can only be manufactured in India and then acquired by the government of India. This will not only boost domestic manufacturing but will also act as an assurance to domestic manufacturers who will be assured that there would be a market, and government is the biggest market one can have, for the production that they are going to now conduct. And so, if the government releases an advanced negative list, the people who are interested in defense technology can look at that list and start their research and development, start their designing, start their production, anticipating the procurement of these items from the government. Because now they don't have to fight or compete against the foreign vendors. All they have to do is to be better than the other domestic players. And the government has specifically mentioned in the draft policy that this list will progressively become longer and longer, which is a great news. At the same time, government also realizes that defense manufacturing and production is a highly specialized and skilled job, which requires a priori estimation of the development times and production lead times, which is basically the minimum amount of leverage in terms of time an agency needs to be able to successfully develop a weapon or an equipment, life cycle costs, as well as maintenance requirements. And so in order to be able to calculate all of these and integrate these into the overall cost, a project management unit has been conceptualized in the draft policy, which will have representation from all the services, which will not only facilitate the overall procurement, but will at the same time also ensure the enforcement of the contracts. Next comes support to MSMEs and startups. Like any other sector, MSMEs or startups form an important part or pillar of defense manufacturing as well. And in this regard, the draft policy proposes two important suggestions. The first is that it proposes component manufacturing by MSMEs immediately once this policy is notified. And from the reading of the draft, it makes us or leads us to believe that the government might make it mandatory for all the components production to be done under MSME sector. Then it proposes an indigenization portal, which would be quite similar to the GEM portal, where all the services are going to list out the demands or their needs, and anyone from the private sector, especially belonging to the MSME sector, will be eligible to contact the services, their project management unit, and propose their idea or the design or the manufactured products. And so it is going to go a long way in addressing the delay in procurement and acquisition process. Then in the draft policy, government has also proposed optimization of resource allocation. So for example, currently all the expenses on acquisition of capital is shown under one head. Now the government is planning to make a distinct budget head for domestic products among all the services. And the government is going to make it mandatory for that particular amount to be spent only on domestic acquisition or the products which have been domestically manufactured. Then in the draft policy, government is actively looking into promotion of investment through ease of doing business. Then in the draft policy, government also mentions of creating a narrow engine complexes, which will not only focus on manufacturing of aviation sector equipments like helicopters and jet fighter jets, but also will look into MRO capabilities, which is basically maintenance, repair and overhaul. And if you know, currently in India, there is no MRO services provided by either Boeing or Airbus. All our aircrafts have to go either to Middle East or European countries in order to get them serviced. Then what about the innovation and R&D in which India is pathetically behind? And in the draft policy, government has proposed target missions and it has specified some items only for them. The government is going to run target missions. So these are hypersonic missiles, fifth generation fighter aircraft, and transport aircraft. So just like government runs very targeted schemes for, let's say, public distribution system, for enabling people to construct their own homes through RAU'S yojanas, similarly specifically targeted schemes will be run, or the missions will be run to manufacture domestically these three highly advanced technologies. And in the draft policy, government specifically mentions lab to lines or concept to implementation scheme. So government is going to lay a lot of emphasis on how and why we can convert the ideas or the designs into functioning models which are effective on ground, which is the basic problem for our country. So these are the highlighting points of draft defense policy, which can be as it is asked in the mains or also in prelims examination. The next article which we have taken for discussion has appeared on 2 pages. Page number 1, where Mr. Modi has said Quad is a force for good. And on page text and context, where on Quad, its origins, goals and future plans. So as the leaders of Quadrilateral Security Dialogue grouping of Australia, Japan and India, and also United States, met in Tokyo yesterday for their second in-person summit, it had to appear in newspaper in a prominent way. As the leader of Western Alliance against Russia, the US is now deeply engaged within the war. Now you know that Western Alliance, which includes US, Japan and Australia, they are up against Russia. For example, US has already committed $54 billion against the war effort. And so the reinvigoration of Europe and NATO in the wake of Putin's aggression in Ukraine has made new demands on US attention and resources, prompting questions about American appetite to take on two more rivals, or two rivals at the same time, which is Russia and China at the same time, and how this might adversely impact US commitment to Quad and Indo-Pacific. And so exactly because of Russian action and Chinese support to Russian action, developed countries have started to think about next strategy to counter China, and what better way to counter China than to Quad. And what better way to counter China than to use Quad? And that is why Quad has again gained that prominence. Now, if you look at the syllabus of GS Paper 2 under International Relations, bilateral, regional and global groupings and agreements involving India and or affecting India's interests. And you can see Quad satisfied both the conditions. India is a member and the actions taken by Quad directly impacts India's relation with China. And so in this regard, it is not only important for us to understand few basic about Quad or Quad 2.0, but also to understand its need as well as the challenges which it faces going forward. So let us now begin the discussion. So starting with the very basics, Quad or Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, which is an informal association of India, USA, Australia and Japan. And as you can see on the screen, if you plot or connect these 4 countries on a global map, what comes out as a figure or what comes out as a diagram looks like a quad, which has 4 sides to it. It is not completely square or rectangle or rhombus, but it has 4 sides, somewhat like a quad. And this is not the first time when the quad has been conceptualized. In fact, if you look at it, 2007, on the sidelines of ASEAN meeting. In fact, if you look at it, in 2007, on the sidelines of ASEAN country meetings was the first time when Quad members actually sat for the first time. And the context to that, or its origin, can be traced back to the evolution of Exercise Malabar and 2004 tsunami, when India conducted relief and rescue operation for itself and for neighboring countries, and was later on joined by USA, Australia, Japan. And that's how these 4 countries, 4 like-minded democracies, came together. Now, in 2007, the China had not risen to the level it has risen now. The relation between China and these countries like US and Japan and Australia was not that bad, was not that acerbic. And so, when in 2007 these countries came together, the objective was not to counter China. And since there was no objective of countering a rising hegemon or a rising global economy or rising global threat, these countries could not be together for a very long amount of time. And so, quickly the momentum was dissipated. And so, after 2007 or 8, these countries did not remain in a form of a coherent group. But in 2017 and 18, These four countries in particular started realizing the threats from rising China. Not just rising China, but aggressive, nationalistic, assertive China. And as a result, these four countries again revived the Quad. And that is why this Quad is often referred to as Quad 2.0. Because this is the second time these four countries have come together. And so, of course, these four countries have come together to boycott China, but that is not given anywhere. And in fact, these four countries, whenever they meet, they deny that their grouping is to counter China. But rather what they say, their objective is free and open Indo-Pacific and rule-based international order or rule-based global order. Now, what do you understand by free and open Indo-Pacific? Of course, any ocean or every ocean is free and open. But this is a particular political term. So, free and open Indo-Pacific has connotations at two levels. At an individual level, that means that people will be free in their daily lives and will live in open societies. And that is a hint towards creation of democratic society in Indo-Pacific region, which is a sly or which is a hint towards China being an authoritarian communist state. People are not free over there. People are not free to choose their lives, their tradition, their occupation. They do not have right to freedom of speech. And that is what free and open Indo-Pacific means to start with at an individual level. But at the state level also, it means something. It means that countries will be able to choose their own path and their own partners and their own destinies. Which indirectly, of course, means that if China tries to influence or if China tries to force a country to a particular path, these four countries are not going to allow that to happen. And as far as rules-based international order or rules-based order or rules-based global order is concerned, it is used to denote the international norms, laws and institutions that have helped to shape, influence and regulate relations between countries since the Second World War. So for example, when we are talking about navigation over sea, we have to follow ITLAWs or UNCLAWs. Similarly, the regulations of United Nations, World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, all that has to be accepted at some level for rule-based international order to work. And we have seen that the growth of China has actually challenged these rules and regulations, and that is why these Western countries, which are patrons of these international organizations, are worried about the rules which they themselves have created and the order which is based on those rules. And so these are the two primary objectives of Quad. Now these are the two objectives, but there are various other developments in the Indo-Pacific region which have necessitated the growth or a Quad-like organization or a group. Of course, there is a need to counter China both economically as well as militarily. The Quad provides a platform to India to seek cooperation from like-minded countries on issues such as ensuring respect of and sovereignty and peaceful resolution of disputes. At the same time, we should also never forget that Indo-Pacific region as a whole is growing in its significance. And Quad provides India with a powerful platform to advance East Asia's interests and to further strengthen its Act East policy. Apart from that, if you look at it, 61% of the global population lives in this region. Out of 15 countries of Indo-Pacific, 7 are active US partners. Apart from that, America has security treaties with 5 countries in this region. Apart from that, if you look at economically, just to give you an idea, top 15 of the 30 mega cities of the world exist in this part of the region. Apart from this, there is another very important aspect, which is that Quad looks like an alignment of like-minded countries. As I have told earlier, that of course all these 4 countries are liberal democratic order. But it's just not limited to that. All these countries have found something in common when it comes to Quad, and that is why they have decided to join it or to make such a group. When it comes to USA, Indo-Pacific region is a region of special concern for US maritime interests. For example, in 2019, around $2 trillion worth of US trade passed through this region, and hence it is important for America to maintain its dominance in this region. Apart from that, rising and assertive China's growing willingness to challenge regional status quo has worried US. At the same time, US has a particular ethical and moral commitment to protect Taiwan's sovereignty. If you look at Japan, which depends heavily on open sea lines of communication for its trade with the world, we know that Japan is an export-led economy. They supply the world's most high-tech manufactured product across the globe, and for which they are dependent upon open sea line of communication, and that is why freedom of navigation is of utmost importance for Japan. Also, we have seen in last 2 decades how China's assertion of its sovereignty in South China Sea, as well as Chinese provocations towards islands which are claimed by both Japan and China in East China Sea, has made Japan wary of China's military buildup in this region. And so, both US, Japan, and of course India have very strong reasons to come together to counter the rising influence of China. Apart from that, Australia is also worried about rising influence of China in its backyard. But the cooperation between these countries is just not limited to countering China. They have much in common. For example, in areas like cybersecurity, space technology, maritime surveillance and deterrence, and climate change, these countries have much in common to be cooperated upon. For example, all the 4 nations of the Quad, USA, Japan, Australia, and India, have been the subject of extensive and persistent cyber attacks emanating from nation-state supported institutions, state-sponsored cyber attacks from China. And so when it comes to need, you can see clearly that there are 1, 2, 3, and 4 extensive needs for Quad. And so rightly these countries have come together and they are emphasizing the need for Quad a lot. But at the same time, when we look or when we project it into the future, we feel that there are certain intrinsic issues with the Quad or the challenges which the Quad needs to resolve before it moves on or before it moves forward to resolve these issues. And the first and foremost challenge which Quad faces is with respect to its unclear objectives and it being an informal group. So when you look at the objectives, what were the 2 objectives which we can recall? Free and open Indo-Pacific and rules-based order. Now these 2 terms have not been defined by any country, or there is no commonly agreed upon definition as to what these 2 terms mean, because they are not an article of a constitution taken from any of the countries. And so each and every country has their own interpretation of these terms. Apart from this, one of the important challenges which Quad faces is that it is an informal group. There is no secretariat, there is no rules, there is no criteria for membership, and it is just like a meeting place for 4 like-minded countries. And so it cannot be compared with a strong organization like NATO. And you can clearly understand the difference is that just by a thought of Ukraine becoming a member of NATO has compelled Russia to attack it. And so strategic thinkers say that unless and until Quad acquires a formal setup like NATO, it is not going to be very effective. Then there are certain challenges which are peculiar to India. First and foremost, by clearly aligning itself with US, Japan and Australia, India has clearly shed non-alignment. And it has come out openly against China, or at least it seems to be the case. Then if you look at it, this is one of the most important points. In order to counter China, India has come together with 3 other countries. Now, if you look at India's problem with China, India has a territorial border dispute with China. But all these 3 countries are nowhere near either China or India. They, in fact, they are thousands of kilometers away from India. And so the question which has to be answered is that Quad by its very nature is maritime in nature, and can a maritime group be an answer for a territorial problem, for India's territorial border problem? Then we have seen how USA has taken itself away from Middle East, from Afghanistan, and it looks like that US is going into its own cocoon. It's looking after its interests first rather than its approach of last 50 years where it was the major interventionist across the globe. And so the question which has to be asked is whether US has the will or has the power to act as a net security provider in Indo-Pacific region. And if US is not able to provide, or if countries do not have confidence in US as a net security provider, will India, with its limited naval capability, have the wherewithal to project its power in Indo-Pacific? And so these are 4 crucial challenges with respect to India itself. And if you look at these 4 countries, you may call them like-minded countries an n number of times, but you will see that there are a lot of unresolved issues among them also. For example, Ukraine crisis is the best example to demonstrate that. In Ukraine crisis, India took the stand which was very different from what has been taken by Japan, US and Australia. Similarly, on issues such as Iran and Afghanistan, India and US sit on the opposite side. Similarly, on the matter of RCEP, India and Australia are on opposing side, and these are not some minor differences. These are some of the major differences which these countries need to resolve in order to act as a coherent group. The executive seems more fragile than hurt appears on page number 6 in editorial. And this article talks about two important provisions of IPC, section 153A and section 295A of IPC, which are often used by the executive and especially the police to register case against people who seem to be hurting other religious communities. And this article analyzes the misuse of this provision. But from the perspective of prelims examination, we are going to understand all those sections which are relevant or which are often used to counter hate speech in our country. So as far as the legal provisions are concerned, the one provision which is always or inevitably used against hate speech or against, within quotes, hate speech is section 153A, which penalizes promotion of enmity between different groups on grounds of religion, race, place of birth, residence, language, and doing acts prejudicial to maintenance of harmony. And this is the language of the act. Then the next important act or next important section of IPC is section 295A, which penalizes deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings of any class by insulting its religion or religious beliefs. Then a sparsely used section is section 298 of IPCC, which penalizes uttering words, etc., with deliberate intent to wound the religious feelings of any person. Then section 505 subsection 1 and 2 of the IPCC penalizes publication or circulation of any statement, rumor or report causing public mischief and enmity, hatred or ill will between classes. And then you have very stringent provisions of Representation of the People's Act 1951, under which section 8 disqualifies a person from contesting election if he or she is convicted of indulging in acts amounting to illegitimate use of freedom of speech and expression. And section 123 subsection 3A and section 125 prohibits promotion of enmity on grounds of religion, race, caste, community or language in connection with election as a corrupt electoral practice and prohibits it. So answer for the question of the day for yesterday is D, neither one nor two. The question for today is a previous year question and it is on ASHA worker, because there was an article in today's The Hindu newspaper about ASHA workers. Since we were not able to cover that topic, we are framing a question for you.